Please join me in welcoming our TOD Sherpa for the day, David Kooris. Thank you.
Great. Thank you both very much, Michelle and Matt, not just for convening the event today, but for your leadership on these issues over the last decade and beyond. And thank you to everyone for being here, to the sponsors. Kevin, phenomenal, right? Couldn't have summed up better the value that TOD creates to communities and the importance of public-private partnerships in implementing our shared vision for the state. As Michelle said, I've held a variety of different roles, public, civic sector, a little bit in the private, appointed positions, elected positions. There's been a lot of different aspects of what I've done over the years, but the common theme, I think, in every role has been in the importance of the relationship between land use, economic development, prosperity, social equity, environmental quality, and transportation, and particularly the role that transit plays in being an anchor for those outcomes within our communities. So I think I'm going to cover a variety of topics today. I think my purpose today was just to kind of give you all a little window into the way that I think about a transit-oriented Connecticut. We'll talk a bit about why, right? What is transit-oriented development or communities? What could this mean for Connecticut? I'm going to define, Matt mentioned, so some people call it transit-oriented communities, transit-oriented development. To me, and there's no science behind this by any means, but to me, they're actually distinct things. So I'm going to tell you all what I think of when I say transit-oriented communities and what that means in the state of Connecticut. What I say when I talk about what I mean when I talk about transit-oriented neighborhoods and what that means here in Connecticut. What I mean when I talk about transit-oriented development and what that means in Connecticut. And then I'll talk a bit about the Municipal Redevelopment Authority, which maybe some of you have not yet had the opportunity to hear about, and how we will play a role in advancing transit-oriented Connecticut over the coming years. So first is the why. I think it comes as, I don't need to tell you all why we value compact, walkable, mixed-use, mixed-income neighborhoods. I mean, that's what you all do for a living. I think that's why you're here. It's certainly, there's no organization better than Connecticut Main Street to advance that objective across the state of Connecticut. But there's something distinct when those downtowns, when those walkable, mixed-use, mixed-income neighborhoods are oriented around transit. And the value that provides is the ability to aggregate all those neighborhoods into something larger, the ability to create a whole that's greater than the sum of its parts. And I think the imperative is so crucially important for us here in Connecticut because we don't have a major downtown. We don't have a global gateway city. We don't have a Boston. We don't have a New York with all the challenges and the opportunities that come along with that. But we do have a constellation of unique downtowns that could be strung together along our transit network so that they function like neighborhoods of something larger. And think about, I know many people in this room have lived in Boston or New York or other cities. I've lived in New York. When you live in a big city like that, you don't experience every single neighborhood across the entire landscape of those 300 square miles. You experience a series of neighborhoods oriented along a metro line or a transit system, and the city has an ability to aggregate together those distinct nodes into something larger that creates a broader experience. There's no reason why we can't do the same in Connecticut, right? I have a tolerance for sitting in traffic, and so I, in my daily routine, string together experiences in communities throughout the state. Transit has the ability to lower the barrier of that experience for many of our residents, and there's no reason why an evening event in New London couldn't be preceded by an afternoon event in New Haven or any number of other communities. And so that's why I think transit orientation is so crucial for the state of Connecticut. So when I talk about transit-oriented communities, I think about this at the regional scale, right? This is the broad community of Connecticut and the way in which the transit network stitches together those neighborhoods into something larger. I could show any number of examples, but I always look to kind of northern New Jersey, DC suburbs when I think about this. This aerial photograph shows 4 different municipal jurisdictions, 3 different counties, 2 states. And if you look at this from the sky, you can pretty easily identify the clusters of more urban, mixed-use neighborhoods. Not surprisingly, they are strung along the metro system, and there's a direct correlation between the station locations and those activity centers. You can read the transit network from the sky just by figuring where the higher density development is. And there is no pockets of urban development outside of that. So there's a strong nexus between the regional transit network and the settlement patterns at that regional scale. So what does this mean for a place like Connecticut? As Matt mentioned, we have a robust transit history. We were built for transit orientation. We had rail lines crisscrossing the state for a century and a half. We had a trolley network that was incredibly robust. Folks have maybe read Crabgrass Frontier. Something that will always stick out in my mind from that book was you could ride an interurban trolley from Maine to Wisconsin with like one gap in the Adirondacks, right? The density of this network was profound, and it was the anchor to many of our walkable neighborhoods radiating out from our urban centers. I don't have this for the whole state, but in the 1930s, if you looked at settlement patterns in Connecticut, you could still pretty clearly read the rail lines and the rail corridors and the trolley systems and the orientation around our ports. We all know post-war, highway construction, suburbanization, we had a preponderance of development in the 70s and 80s and 90s that started to create a spatial mismatch between the transit network and our development patterns and settlement patterns. And a lot of those rail lines became defunct and services were disbanded. But I think we're seeing a change, right? This is building permits from 2023. I think we're starting to see a realignment between our transit system and our development, and that's largely due to factors that are not necessarily grounded in transit around demographic shifts and a whole variety of other factors, but this presents a significant opportunity for the state of Connecticut to reclaim that transit-oriented legacy at the community or the regional scale. So what do I mean when I talk about transit-oriented neighborhoods? I mean, this to me is drilling in at the individual station area and looking at the pattern of roads and open spaces and the relationship between public and private development within that walking distance of the station node. There's been a long history of neighborhood planning across the United States, starting in the early 20th century, and then moving on into the 21st. In the early 20th century, we had this rise of neighborhood planning. Clarence Perry and Perry and Stein. Radburn, New Jersey was a classic example. Incorporated a variety of uses, a variety of densities and unit types oriented around a set of pedestrian networks, but accommodated the automobile and oftentimes had no relationship to the transit network. As that scaled up, I think we're all familiar with the more typical auto-oriented sprawl that we saw across the country in the 60s and the 70s, and as a counter to that, we saw in the 80s and 90s the rise of new urbanism, the idea of creating more traditional neighborhoods, incorporating a broader range of unit types, more mixed use, walkable, organized around town greens. But unfortunately, oftentimes those new urbanist nodes didn't have the regional framework or the transit connectivity. So at the end of the day, the limited number of trips that could be accommodated within walking distance were offset by the greater number of trips that required a car to access other communities within the region. And so in the early 20th century, in the late 20th and early 21st century, we see a revision of this neighborhood model with that same mix of uses and scales and walkability, with transit as a key anchor connecting that neighborhood to other similar nodes throughout the region. So what do transit-oriented neighborhoods look like in Connecticut? So the good news is, because of when we developed and because of that original transit orientation, we have a lot of neighborhood centers throughout the state that have the perfect pattern to support transit. We have town greens and walkable main streets radiating out from the regional rail system. Unfortunately, a lot of those communities no longer have the rail service, and so there's a missing T in the TON, but a lot of them do. But some of our newer station areas focus more on the park and ride and the accessibility of the station by the car, with little thought to the surrounding neighborhood fabric or how the station could be a catalyst for economic development over the coming years and decades. And so what do we mean when we talk about transit-oriented development? Now we're drilling into the actual site, a single property or set of properties, and the ways in which buildings are built to respond to transit. Some examples, this is obviously an incredibly urban one, but this is the air rights development over South Station that's taking place right now in Boston. Obviously, the people living in this tower are going to be transit oriented. They live above a station, above the MBTA system. They can walk right downstairs and access the rest of the regional network. But what I think is incredibly interesting and what makes this a really good example of transit-oriented development is this was the condition at South Station prior to its construction. And it's the construction of the building that created a new public space and a connection from the station to the surrounding neighborhood, ensuring that that particular development will not only spur ridership from the residents and visitors to that building, but it created infrastructure that makes it more transit friendly for folks in the surrounding neighborhood to access and utilize the station as well. A smaller scale example from Pasadena, literally a rail line incorporated into the development with the station at the core of the property, where the courtyard for the development doubles as the station plaza, not only orienting the building itself, but acting as a conduit for the surrounding neighborhood to better access the station. At an even smaller scale, closer to home, this is in Westchester County on the New Haven line. This was a surface parking lot. Make note of the stair tower there. And with redevelopment on that surface parking, not only did it convert the storage for automobiles into walkable mixed-use development where those residents and shoppers and diners in these stores are more likely to use transit, but they created a new public realm bridging from the station facility to the rest of the community so that that transit-oriented development also increases ridership from the surrounding transit-oriented neighborhood. So what does transit-oriented development look like in Connecticut? Unfortunately, a lot of what we have allowed around our train stations over the last few decades, I would call transit adjacent rather than transit oriented. It happens to be next to the station, but it's not going to spur ridership, and it doesn't facilitate folks who live one parcel beyond accessing the station. We've got a ton of surface parking lot, but I'm not gonna talk bad about that because that presents an opportunity for transit-oriented development in the future. It's a little bit difficult to walk across, but it will be transformed when we redevelop it. But the office building that turns its back on the station, this is literally leaving a station platform. I won't name the stations. How do you even get into this building if you take the train there to go to work? The drive-through CVS, where you literally leave the station platform and you look at a fence and car queuing and circulation. How do you get through that site, let alone the lack of ridership produced by that site? How do you get through it to access the rest of the neighborhood? But we've got some really good examples too, whether repurposing old private parking lots, and not just the transit orientation of the building, but the new pedestrian realm that's created as part of it, activated by ground floor retail and restaurants to bridge from the surrounding neighborhood to the station. A great example that was a public-private partnership between DOT and developer that not only created good, ground-oriented, walkable use, but directly across the street and in coordination with a new public space that bridges the gap between the station facility and the development. So what is the Connecticut Municipal Redevelopment Authority? We were established by statute several years ago, but just launched in 2024. We're governed by a board, and I know several of our members are here today that represent gubernatorial appointees, legislative appointees, and several members of the governor's cabinet. We are, as Michelle said, tasked with supporting communities in their efforts to redevelop their downtowns or their station areas with a focus on transit-oriented development and housing. Our objective is to create a variety of tools, both with technical support and financial support, that are well suited to meet the needs of our partner communities. Some communities need help with zoning, others need help with fiscal impact analysis, others yet with infrastructure investment, and many, if not all, need gap financing to finish out the pro forma for the development itself. And our hope is that we're going to create a suite of activities that can fill all those gaps. Our board is going to be taking up a name change this afternoon. So we are going to change from the Municipal Redevelopment Authority to the Municipal Development Authority. So we will from henceforth be CMDA. And this is just a word cloud from our statute, just to give you a sense of kind of what the intent is, right? A big focus on development, multidimensional, transit-oriented, stakeholders, housing, economy. But I think also in here are some very important words about facilitate, engage, right? So we are meant to be a tool and a support structure for those municipalities who join us. We are an opt-in organization. And so any municipality out around the state that is not within the Capital Region Development Authority, so theoretically 161 of the 169 municipalities can opt in to work with us. You have to have a downtown or a train station area. Once you opt in, we take a look at the zoning. We determine whether or not it will likely substantially increase the number of housing units, provide some recommendation. Towns can take it or leave it, but you have to work with us in order to get to the point where you can apply to us for funding, and we can fund transit-oriented development, housing, building demolition or rehabilitation, or anything that can be considered development or redevelopment. The final point that I'll make is we do aim to operate at each of these scales. And so at the scale of transit-oriented communities, we will be doing a system-wide analysis of TOD potential throughout the state. At our board meeting today, we will be taking up a contract with a consultant to help us with that work. We will be working in very close coordination with all of the COGs along the system, with the Office of Responsible Growth. There's a lot of great work that's been done. Many of you have been involved in that. We hope to aggregate all those efforts that have been done on a station area basis or on a corridor basis and be able to answer that question of what is the cumulative potential for transit-oriented development with the state of Connecticut. How much of our housing need can we meet within walking distance of our regional rail system? What are the key transit improvements that can expand those opportunities? What are the key local investments that can help unlock that potential? And try and get us all on the same page, working towards this shared objective of maximizing a transit-oriented Connecticut. The hope is to have that work done by the end of the year. At the transit-oriented neighborhood scale, so these are the 161 municipalities who could potentially work with the Municipal Development Authority. We have the earliest that a municipality could have raised their hand to join us was February of this year. And in just the last month and a half, 9 municipalities have already joined, and another 25 or so are in the process of doing so. And so I'm confident that by later this year, we will have dozens of municipalities working with us to unlock that transit-oriented potential. What does this mean at the station area level, right? So we will be working with these communities to help them achieve their goals, helping them with zoning, helping with visualizations, helping with fiscal impact analysis, but the ultimate output of that is a development district boundary. There will be a line on the map, and within that line is where we can support projects. I want to spend a minute on this because I think it's crucially important for our time right now. When we look at these places in conjunction with our partner municipalities, we'll be trying to figure out how to unlock the potential of that place, how to balance economic, environmental, and social objectives. But a key thing that I think that we as an organization are going to bring to the table are helping the municipality market those development opportunities and helping coordinate the public-private partnerships that are necessary to realize these community visions. And just to go off on that tangent for 1 second, I'm a strong believer in partnerships between the public and private sector. Every community I work with, I always emphasize that your plan of conservation and development or your comprehensive plan, whatever you call it, is implemented by two tools. It is implemented through public investment embodied in your capital plan, and it is implemented through private investment controlled by zoning, right? Development is not some other. Developers are not some third-party actor. They are a private sector implementer of your vision, and if they're not doing what you want them to do, it's because you haven't managed it properly through your own development regulations, and they will invest far more than a community ever will in its capital projects, and so that's the big opportunity to change the shape of your community. So in addition to the marketing and outreach, we will help with permitting. Folks have heard me say this. It is aspirational, but I'm a strong believer that if we've worked with the municipality, there's a clear vision in place for this district scale neighborhood development. If the zoning is in place and the local municipality has done its part to set the regulatory tone, we should do our part at the state. And we're working and looking at things like Office of State Traffic Administration, flood management certification, SHPO, other opportunities to front load some of the permitting process and achieve that at the district scale. And I think there couldn't be a more important thing to be talking about at this time. I won't get into politics, but we have to figure out how to more quickly implement our visions, our shared visions for the future of our communities. And if we can't figure out how to align our regulatory framework in order to achieve results in the near term, we're going to be consistently stuck in a problem where we have a difficulty in articulating what the point is of all this stuff that we're doing. And so I do believe that the partnerships between CMDA and towns and cities around the state has the potential to set a new model at the district scale that can drastically shorten the timeline and increase the likelihood of investment and ramp up the pace at which we achieve these future strategies for our communities and then in the aggregate for our state as a whole. And then, of course, we're going to be involved in implementation. We have a $60 million bond authorization today. The governor's proposed that to increase by another $30 million in fiscal 27. And as I said, we're empowered to invest in transit-oriented development, housing, building demolition, rehabilitation, or development and redevelopment. We expect that our first communities will be in a position with boundaries set this summer so that we can start entertaining project funding applications. And I think the way in which we participate will vary. Some communities need infrastructure that's designed to unlock the potential of the district. Other communities need infrastructure that's very site-specific for a particular project. Most, as I said, developers have a gap, and the projects don't pencil, and we can be involved in low-interest loans. But that money's not going to go as far as we'd like it to, which is why the permitting and the marketing and the strategic piece is so crucially important. So that's what we're trying to achieve. I hope that in the future, the best place to view the evolution of the state of Connecticut is from the window seat on any one of our passenger trains. We're not going to do it alone. It's going to be a strong partnership between us and our member municipalities, and a partnership between us and all of you. And so if folks want to work with us, want to help, want to be part of this effort, don't hesitate to be in touch, and I look forward to working with you all over the coming years towards a transit-oriented Connecticut. Thanks.
Hi, David.
Hi.
You mentioned a lot about rail. Can you talk about transit hubs and how they can play a role in achieving transit-oriented development as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I emphasize rail because statutorily, we are limited in working with rail or bus rapid transit, existing or planned. But that's not to say that other transit and more flexible transit can't have a potential anchoring impact on economic and transit-oriented development. I think the key is that sense of permanency, right? And so whether it's a transit hub that has a physical location, places like Torrington or Middletown come to mind, or it's a bus rapid transit light that has some level of confidence building that the private sector's investment will be matched with ongoing transit service. The level of investment is going to be commensurate to what the quality of the service is, what the likelihood of that service is persevering over time, and what you can connect to with that service. And so it's a broad spectrum with, rail hubs like New Haven and Stamford sort of at one end of the hub and the local bus route at the other end of the hub, but there is a transit-oriented neighborhood and development model that fits everywhere on that spectrum.
Good morning, David.
Hey, morning.
Could you speak a little bit more about how the districts would get defined, and does some of that connected other transportation and ways to feed the station come to play when defining the district?
Yeah, great question. So the process for defining the district, I'll kind of remind in the simplest sense, municipalities opt in through action of their local legislative body. We review and certify the zoning, or maybe recommend some tweaks, and then we enter into an MOU with the chief elected official that establishes the parameters of the development district, including its boundaries. The boundaries of the development district statutorily can be within a half a mile of rail or bus rapid transit, existing or planned, and or within a downtown. And so if a downtown spreads beyond a half a mile of a transit walkshed or exists where there is not fixed route transit, that can be a defining factor for the boundaries. Whether or not bus or shuttle service or bike lanes can extend the reach of the transit district beyond the half a mile, I would say not today per our statute, but I think that is definitely something that will evolve over time. On the one hand, we want to work every place that folks will invite us. On the other hand, I think we have to be realistic about what our capacity is, and we don't want to dilute the impact of our work in the near term beyond those core downtowns and the station areas. But I think if you add up every kind of walkshed around a half a mile of the regional transit system and all of the downtowns, whether or not they're transit oriented, we're talking about 1% or so of the land area of the state of Connecticut. And so it's a very localized set of kind of acupuncture interventions. that don't take up a big land area of any one municipality. I don't think they're particularly threatening in terms of creating an alternative mode for permitting. But when you add them all together, strung to one another with this transit system, they can be absolutely transformative for the state. Thank you all.
Thank you, David.